The most sophisticated crimeware, the stuff that the criminal underground is using on the internet, is built to steal. Steal primarily credit cards, personal information, and also bank balances. But that market hasn't been good over the past couple of years. I won't bore you with statistics. I can illustrate this with just one fact. The average price of a newly stolen credit card on the black market is just 25 cents. It used to be hard to steal credit cards, and you used to be able to get away with a lot of credit card fraud, but no longer. It's substantially easier to steal the numbers, but you can do less with them. So steal 10,000 credit card numbers sounds like a good haul. This will net you just 2,500 bucks. Now, bank robbery continues to be a good business. It's where the money is. However, no matter how sophisticated your technology, there are signs that someone will notice eventually when you rob a bank account. No matter how good your tech stack, someone will notice that the money is missing. So we tracked the bad guys here in advertising, which is how I ended up on this stage, because we found that this incredibly sophisticated technology, what we call rootkits and exploits and the payloads that run on those things, originally developed to perpetrate bank fraud, has been reapplied to pursue the $36 billion in online advertising spending each year. Because while this is a sophisticated market, it's well structured, and it's been growing more sophisticated, there's a lot of room for fraud. How much room? Well, the estimates are all over the map. It's widely understood that there's fraud in the advertising market, but the extent has been hard to pin down. And that's because it's very difficult to directly detect the fraud in this scene. So instead, what various people who've tried to get their arms around the problem have done is looked at the signs of fraud. So you'll notice whenever you look at these estimates of fraud that they're always couched in certain kind of wiggle terms. So we talk about very low quality traffic or suspicious traffic. And this is because no one wants to pin down the actual hard figures associated with, say, actual botnet traffic, because that's hard to detect. Instead, you look for statistical anomalies, things that don't really make sense. And in the aggregate, you can kind of back into a number. It's still all over the map. Before I go on, I want to give you a brief overview of how the bad guys actually get paid. Fundamentally, the mechanic is always the same, which is that a website somewhere receives money. They're receiving that money from an ad network or one of the other players in the ecosystem that actually pays out affiliate fees for views. And the basic fraud is this. You inflate your numbers by sending fraudulent traffic to the sites that are under your control. Sometimes those sites are actually operated by the botnet operators, the guys who control millions of machines, or sometimes they're paid off downstream from the publishers who collect these fraudulently inflated revenues. So the name of the game from the botnet operator's perspective is hiding their fake traffic in among the human traffic. And it's not a monolithic enemy. We're not talking about a group of bad guys who get together at some bad guy convention and compare notes and decide on how to defraud the advertising industry. Instead, the entire scene is actually composed, it's a fascinating evolutionary landscape, of many, many fraud groups pursuing different strategies at differing levels of sophistication. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Let's dive into some of the models for fraud. The first is the easiest to understand, but in many ways also the most sophisticated. Really, really good operations, the kinds that are extraordinarily good at hiding in the noise, simply directly target ad networks. So you'll have botnet operators who are operating their own cash out points. Those are the fake publishers that look like legit websites. And they send fraudulent traffic typically to a very, very large number of these sites that all look independent, but aren't. The first order fraudsters have to be able to defeat the big data techniques of the most sophisticated ad networks, so they tend to be really good. And they're good not necessarily just because they've done some good reverse engineering against the defensive measures that they're up against, but simply because they've survived. Ad fraud detection has been going on for quite some time, and broadly speaking, the state of the art in detection is applying what we'd now term big data to the problem. You're looking at statistical anomalies and you're applying big data heuristics to find the sites that just don't seem to make any sense. Well, over time, that has formed a kind of selection pressure against which the bad guys have evolved. So if you're not good at hiding in the noise, you stopped your fraud game several years ago. The guys who have remained are the ones that have survived against that selection pressure. Moving into a higher level of sophistication, we have what we call the traffic washers. And this is really fascinating. It took us quite some time to really crack the code on. What we started seeing was a great deal of automated traffic coming from sites that clearly weren't operating bots themselves. And at first this didn't make any sense, because why would these bots be viewing websites and clicking on ads that they weren't getting paid for? Digging deeper, we found that the way it works is this. You have a very large number of sites, sometimes operating perfectly independently of each other, and in many cases not really understanding the fraud mechanics, who are simply playing traffic arbitrage. So they have found that they can buy cheap traffic on low-end traffic sources. This could be PPC ad networks, various companies that specialize in traffic sourcing for very low amounts of money. This traffic typically is highly bot-ridden, and they host on their websites higher, more premium ads that might be exchange traded or otherwise. And they find that some amount of the traffic that they buy goes and clicks on. So they're simply looking at the amount of money that they spend on buying that traffic and the amount of money that they make through the click-through rates, and if it's positive, they're not asking terribly difficult questions. They're just collecting checks. The effect is that these middlemen sites effectively wash the traffic, and sometimes they can look really legitimate. We see a lot of domain holding pages that actually operate this way, which kind of solves an open mystery that maybe many of us here have had, which is, when you typo a domain, you end up at some page that's hosting ads. It sounds remarkable, like, really? Are there that many people who click on an ad after doing a domain typo? Well, in many cases, incredibly, these domain holding pages are themselves buyers of advertising on the PPC networks or otherwise, and they're actually traffic arbitrageurs participating in the overall fraud scene.